Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Viking Academy podcast. I'm your host, Eric Solbakken. And today we have Susan Latremoille on the show. She and I talk through yoga. She is a certified yoga instructor. And we're talking back in the 70s is when she first started this. But the wonderful thing that we find in this exploration is, and I didn't realize this, is that yoga is probably more of the ethos of the Viking Academy more than I ever thought. It's the combination of the mind, the body, and the spirit into yourself, into who you are. And we talk about the physiological changes, the spiritual changes, the mental changes that happen. We also talk about what yoga styles are out there and which ones you should start with first, which ones you shouldn't. And I had a lot of other aha moments in there. We talk about the vagus nerve. We talk about meditation. We talk about all things mind, body, and spirit on this episode. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did recording it. As I have now got a whole new appreciation for yoga, I basically have to get off my butt and start exploring that aspect of my life. So I'm going to go start doing yoga myself. So there you go. Let's get started with the interview. Let's go explore. Hi, Susan. How are you?
Great, Eric. Thrilled to be here with you today.
I am very appreciative of you being part of the inaugural group of podcast guests that I've had on the Viking Academy. I think yours is actually going to be, yours will be the second in the body realm, but that's the thing that I'm really excited about getting into the conversation with you is how we're going to touch on all three. I think we're going to touch on all three, the mind, the body, and the spirit. And for our listeners, could you just give them a little background on who you are and what you're doing specifically in the area of yoga and teaching yoga?
Mm-hmm. Good. I'd be happy to. So my first experience with yoga was way back in the 70s when I went to a high school gym one evening and did my first yoga class. And as you know, at the end of most yoga classes, you end with shavasana, which is a translation in Sanskrit for dead corpse or dead man's pose or corpse pose. And it's really the time when you lie still on your back on the mat. And the purpose of it is to integrate everything, all the movements that you've done, the breath, the body work, and so on. Anyway, I had that amazing experience of going into a very deep relaxation. And so that was my first introduction to yoga. And I thought, wow, I want more of this. So then fast forward over the years when I started working on Bay Street in the financial industry, the gym that I belonged to had lunchtime yoga classes. And actually, they were in a squash court, so it wasn't really the ideal setting, but I used to go every week, at least once a week, for these lunchtime yoga classes. And I found that it really set me up for a great afternoon. It was very restorative. It was a complement to all the other physical work training that I was doing. And my teacher at the time inspired me then to go on and take more different types of yoga training at the Kripalu Yoga Center in Lenox, Massachusetts. So over the years, I would go and do weekend workshops or, different courses there. And then that led me to do my yoga teacher training at the Kripalu Center. And at the time, I wasn't really sure that I was going to teach, but it really set me up to be able to offer classes. And so that's really how I got started in my yoga journey.
Okay, so you like start off the hopper explaining yoga. Well, as you know, when you finish yoga, you lie there dead. I'm sorry, like for myself, like I've done yoga. I did one hot yoga session, killed me. I was sweating profusely out of every crevice of my body that I didn't know I had, and I just basically never went back. And so just let's go back to that concept of the dead corpse pose. Like right at the end, you actually lie flat and dead. Can you explain like that a little bit more? Because to me, I would think that after doing kind of a physical exercise, you would be like energized and feeling alive. But yet in yoga, it's like a paradox. You're actually doing this pose of a dead corpse. Can you explain that one a little better?
Well, there are many different types of yoga, and I'm not sure all of them do shavasana at the end, although most of the styles of yoga that I'm familiar with, you do shavasana. And the whole point of this dead man's pose or corpse pose is that it's a time for your body to integrate all the physical movements that you've done. And since the meaning of yoga, the Sanskrit translation of the word yoga means union or yoke, yoga, yoke, union of body, mind, and spirit. It's the shavasana is the time where you get to integrate all of those things by doing nothing. And people find that after they've done a yoga practice of any length, an hour or half an hour, whatever, that time is, they say, it's the most important aspect of your yoga practice. And it's the one that people tend to skip because they think, what's that going to do? I've done all my physical stuff. Now it's time to get on with my day. But really, I've found in my own experience and working with students as well, that it really is a very important time to just kind of settle in, let the breath become light and free, and let the mind go into almost a meditative state while the body relaxes and rests.
There is very interesting thought I had there about yoga, because I think there's a disconnect between what most of us think of yoga. Oh, look, you're going off in your yoga pants and your yoga mat, and they're going to do their yoga thing. But you highlighted on the fact that the yoga actually means union. It's to bring union to the mind, the body, and the spirit, to connect all of them together. And the interesting part of this shavasana, if I'm saying that correctly, shavasana, I wrote it down phonetically, because as you and I know, I can mess up words pretty bad. As I had you on the previous podcast, I was completely crapping your last name, and I still apologize for that ahead of time. Like ahead of this podcast, I apologize. I said I'm going to make sure that I don't do that. But at the end of doing the shavasana, it's doing nothing and leaving, and nothing is left undone. There's that spiritual concept of doing nothing and nothing is left undone. So at the end of the yoga, you're doing nothing, but yet everything is becoming one. It's becoming a union of the mind, the body, and the spirit. That is really beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. It's wonderful. And oftentimes in my classes, I will read something that kind of helps the students to settle into that state. It's just maybe a nugget of thought or a small poem. And, they might reflect on that, or they might just go deep into that deeper relaxation. And I've had both experiences where my mind is focusing on what I just heard, but oftentimes they just simply relax. And that's a challenge for a lot of people who are that type A, get up and go. Yoga's active, running, hot, whatever. But really, for those people, that a shavasana time is very, very valuable. So I can't recommend the shavasana highly enough, even though people tend to blow it off because they think, the yoga class is over, I'm leaving.
But that is the critical linchpin of the whole purpose of yoga, is to create that union. And for that union of mind, body, and spirit to actually occur, you need to be quiet. You need be quiet and stop doing, so that it can be done. So you can integrate your mind, your body, and spirit integrates itself without you've done the work ahead of time during the yoga. You've done your part, and now the shavasana does its part of bringing it all together and integrating it.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, that concept of spirit is a tough one, because they think, spiritual, then some people might think, extrapolate from that, religion, whatever. So if for people that aren't familiar with it, I describe spirit as breath. So union of body, mind, and breath. And so that's a more approachable way for some people that don't get spirit.
Yeah, and that I'm sure you and I've talked about this before. Like there's a difference between being religious and connecting to one's spirit, and spirit really to be inspired is to be in spirit. So in other words, creative thoughts, like I play in a heavy metal band and I played music for all my life pretty well. I can't remember when I wasn't playing something. I was either banging sticks against the wall of my mom's house, which drove her crazy, which is why she bought me a drum set so I could stop hitting things on the walls, or a piano. But when I was creating something, it doesn't come from my conscious mind. It's like it drops into the conscious mind. It's something that just appears from another realm that I'm not consciously aware of. And that's that spirit that's out there. There's a underlying energy or a force, like Star Wars. I love my Star Wars. There's an energy that's flowing throughout the universe that's animating us, and that gives us inspirational ideas, gives that spirit. And so, for the Viking Academy, the big thing for me is like, and I keep telling people this, it's like, I'm going to talk a lot about the Vikings and their connections to Odin and Thor and Freya and what I've found has worked for me. But it's inside each one of us to find out what's your connection to your spirit. Like it's very personal. It's personal and it's sacred. And I totally empathize and understand what you mean by that in terms of if we say spirit to some people, that blocks them off. But I've really noticed a big shift like this. Talking about spirituality has become mainstream as opposed to like in the 70s when you were going to that would have been, oh, look, you're doing that hippie stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly how people thought of it, was hippie stuff. And it's amazing how it's become mainstream. But, when you go back to the history of yoga, and obviously it was started in India about 5,000 years ago, it was never meant or designed as a group activity. And when I was visiting India and did a yoga class with a master there, he said, in India, we don't do it in groups. It's something that you do in the privacy of your home. And it's usually passed down from kind of father to son. Also, in India, in the past, this was a very male activity. And it's kind of ironic because today it's, go to yoga classes, predominantly women. But the physical yoga was considered more of a male area. And women did more meditation, seated meditation and that sort of thing. But it's amazing how we've westernized the whole thing and made it much more of a female activity today than a male activity. Although I think enlightened men do yoga for sure. And men really need the physical aspect of it because a lot of men do physical sports where their muscles get tight, they get strong, they get tight, and then that's when injury happens. So yoga is a perfect complement, really, to the tightening effect of strong and fast muscles. And it's the athletes that I know that added in yoga to their regime benefit tremendously from it. Lower injuries, more speed, more flexibility, and so on. So it's not just a woo-woo activity or something that you might or might not do. To me, it's a necessary part of that overall health approach.
Yeah, you don't have to go buy a pair of Lulu stretchies or be in the woo-woo space, as we call it, to go do the yoga. It was interesting, like when I mentioned I did Bikram's hot yoga, and I did it once. And the reason why I did it is back when I had my accounting practice. So I was a chartered accountant I still am actually. This is 35 years I'm coming up. No, 36. It'll be 36 years I've been in the accounting profession in that world anyways. I had a client that had Bikram hot yoga, and it was the first one introduced in Victoria. Like there was no other one. So I was like, as a new client, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go support you and I'm going to go do this. And I went to do it. And I was like, oh my God, it was so hard. It was so brutal and it was sweating and all the rest of it. And I was like, I was probably still also in that mindset, which was, this is for other people, not for me. It's not it's not an Eric thing. It's the woo-woo or the girl space or whatever. It was in my head at the time. But you said something in the beginning of this podcast that has made me have the attraction rather than promotion feeling of yoga, which is the union of the body, mind, and spirit. And for me, that is the essence, that's the ethos of the Viking Academy, right? And for me to go, I need to start doing yoga. My energy healer, Denise Grams, and I had her as one of the first, she was one of the first podcast guests that I had. And we get down and she does energy healing at the quantum molecular, like down at the quantum level of your cells. And she's told me multiple times that I should do yoga, that my body's saying it wants yoga. Like my body wants it at the quantum level. It's saying, Eric, you need to go do yoga. So when you offered up those classes, I was like, I gotta get on this, right? So I, in full disclosure for everyone listening and watching, I haven't done it yet. So, I've got a renewed interest of wanting to be exploring this part because, again, I want to integrate those three areas in myself. And the fact that yoga is the union of it, it seems to be the linchpin of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many different types of yoga. I mean, you had experience with Bikram, and I would say that the style of yoga that I teach is more hatha yoga. But then there's Ashtanga yoga, restorative yoga, yin yoga, vinyasa yoga. It's morphed into many branches from the same tree. And each one has a different kind of focus and a different benefit. And so it really is a matter of where you fit. I mean, I went to a hot yoga class and it just wasn't for me. It was, I didn't enjoy the extreme heat and the sweatiness of the room. And it was always about pushing to your edge. And I know a lot of people that have been injured in hot yoga because when your body gets heated up, the muscles are stretchier. And then you have a tendency to push further. And then that's when those micro tears come in. But they happen in the muscles and the ligaments and so on. So, it's not, that style is a certain, hot yoga is a certain style, but a more approachable style from my perspective, which everybody can do, is hatha yoga, which is much more, it can be vigorous and it can be difficult, but it's a more gentle, approachable style that I would say is more suitable for the masses. And then once people have explored a hatha yoga, then if you want a more active, flowing yoga, there's vinyasa. I also got trained as a restorative teacher because we just don't do enough restorative activity or non-activity in our life. And so by using restorative yoga, it's a great way to calm the nervous system down. And we're all running, pretty much on nervous energy, a lot of us, a lot of the time. And so we need that time when the vagus nerve, which is that sort of central nerve, can switch from sympathetic activity to parasympathetic. And so restorative yoga puts us in a more parasympathetic state. And we need that in our lifestyle today.
Thank you for that, because I was writing down feverishly as I'm listening to you. And one of the questions I was going to have, especially for the listeners out there, is how does one approach yoga for the first time? And I think you answered that. In your opinion, the best yoga to start with for the beginner would be hatha yoga. And then from there, you can start exploring the further areas. And so maybe did I jump into the deep end of the pool and just going, I'm going to do Bikram hot yoga and I'm going to go sweat and push myself to the max and blah, blah, which is typical Eric fashion, right? Like I have two speeds, go and stop. If I do something, it's going to be absolutely huge, or it'll, I won't do it at all. So maybe that's, for me, I had gone and kind of pushed the limits too much. But for the beginner, hatha yoga is, from your perspective, the best gateway to start introducing one to yoga.
Yes, exactly. And, there's lots of YouTube yoga out there today. And I even use it myself because I like to explore different teachers and learn from them and see different sequences and that sort of thing. And a lot of the teachers that teach online will stratify their classes by beginner, intermediate, advanced, and also by length of class. So a good place to start would be a beginner hatha yoga, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And so much has to do with whether you resonate with the teacher or not. I mean, I've done classes with teachers and their voice drives me nuts, or their expressions drive me crazy, or, I feel what they're doing it's too woo-woo yoga. It's not the real, what I call real yoga. So it's all about finding where you resonate with the teacher, with the style, with the class and so on. And I think during the pandemic, we all got much more used to doing online. And I teach both. I teach live in the summer at my cottage, and I teach online in the rest of the year. And I mean, there's nothing that replaces us being in community with others and being, ideally in the out of doors. But, failing that, online is a great way to get your yoga in without having to travel anywhere. And you can kind of pick your time of day to do it. I'm a big advocate of adding it into my morning routine, because I feel that, and it's great to do before bed as well. But, it's one of those things like meditation that unless you do it, get it into your routine in the morning, it can slip off the agenda and not get done. So for me, the morning is the ideal time.
Right. There's one other thing that you said in there, which is you were talking about the vagus nerve.
Vegas.
I thought I wrote down Vegas.
V-A-G-U-S, like Las Vegas, V-A-G-U-S, vagus nerve.
Vegas. Could you explain the vagus nerve a little more to myself and to the listeners? Because I'm curious on that, how it functions.
Yeah, so I'm not an anatomical expert by any mean, but I do know that the vagus nerve is the biggest and most central nerve in the body, and that there are kind of two states for our nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And normally when we're in the fight and flight mode, we've activated the sympathetic nervous system. But the restoration of our cells and the restoration of the body happens in the parasympathetic state. And so the vagus nerve, by doing more of a restorative style or a gentler style of yoga and breathing, I should say, breathing and meditation, those all help to move us into more of a parasympathetic state where our muscles, cells, minds, everything can restore.
So, okay, that's great. I really appreciate that, because I was trying to get my head wrapped around the sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So sympathetic, you're fighting. Your sympathetic is you're having sympathy for something, or you want to take care of it, so you're going to fight it. But when you're parasympathetic, you're now restoring yourself. What is the difference between your regular hatha yoga that you do, like say and versus restorative, or do you insert restorative within the hatha, or is it like combinations and permutations? You can do anything you want.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes incorporate a restorative pose or sequence into my regular class. So typically a restorative yoga pose would be one with lots of props. So you're not actually holding your muscles like you would be, let's say, in a warrior pose. A restorative pose means putting your body into an extreme state of comfort. And typically we do that with blocks. We do it with yoga blocks. We do it with bolsters. We do it with blankets. We do it with pillows and cushions. So there's a bit of a setup involved in a lot of restorative poses, but it's just getting into such a comfortable state that you can really drop into that parasympathetic state. Whereas active yoga with hatha or any kind of the active yogas, you're requiring muscle, you're requiring engagement of the skeleton, of the spine, of the muscles and ligaments in the body. And so at the end of a hatha class, it is nice to put in let's say, restorative pose like supported bridge pose, which I would describe as lying on your back with your knees bent, which would be just, lying there. But then the bridge pose is where you actually press down with your feet to lift your hips up. And an active bridge would be, yes, you're using your leg muscles, your abdominal, your core muscles to hold your body up in that plane. But if you were to make it a bridge into a restorative pose, you'd put a block, a yoga brick or something underneath your sacrum, and then relax the sacrum down into the block. And that would make it more of a restorative pose.
Okay. This kind of moves me to the next question. How does one know when one needs the active yoga and when one needs restorative yoga? Like for me, when I'm working out, I'm like, I feel I'm hungry. I need to, or I get completely tired. It's like, okay, now I need rest, because for growing muscles and going to the gym, it's actually rest and sleep is actually more important than the actual working out, because you're like, you can push yourself to overexertion. Like you can go too far one way versus the other. And my body gives me cues as I'm going out through the day. And this is, again, the kind of the ethos of the Viking Academy. It's figure out what works for you. Like explore, this whole exploration is for each person to do individually, but also with the group. So we're doing it as a members, as a movement of Vikings saying, let's go explore, but you got to find out what works for you. Like not one food works for everybody, not one exercise works, and not one mental exercise works for everybody, not one spirituality works for everybody. But how can I know, for me, for Eric, when do I need, or let's turn this around, Susan. How do you know when you need restorative versus the active?
So how do I know for me? Well, most days I like to do an active yoga practice because I feel that that's where my muscles get stretched. I feel if there are any tight spots in my body, I know that I'm building strength in different muscle groups, and it's a chance to connect with the breathing. So typically I like to do an active practice in the morning. And then at night, let's say you've had a very busy day and my mind's going a mile a minute, then a restorative practice in the evening before bed is a lovely wind down exercise and a lovely wind down. But I think it's different for everyone. I mean, I know people that just love yin yoga, which yin yoga is described as holding poses for long periods of time. So some people gravitate to yin, other people, and it's like we can all do all of the different styles. It's just knowing when. It's kind of like you talked about eating, knowing what your body needs for food. So there's certain days you think, an apple is exactly what I need. And then other days, I need a steak. I need some heavy duty protein. Or, or just you crave certain like nuts, or you crave chocolate or whatever. It's really your body telling you, okay, this is what you need to feed me right now. And with yoga, it's the same. After you've experienced some different styles and you get used to doing some yoga, then your body dictates. It says you need to do some relaxation today, or you need to be really active and vigorous with it. So it's just through your own trial and error and your own experience then that you find what works.
Sorry, excuse me. I love that, because that is it's giving me a vision into trusting your being, trusting yourself, shall we say. I'm going to put the self in a capital S versus the small self, right? The small self is excuse me. Small self is the one that gets me into all the trouble, right? It gets me eating the bad foods, gets me doing the bad actions. It gets me doing not connecting to my spirit. The big S, my self will tell me when I need to have that healthy food. It's my conscious, almost like we start talking about when we talk about having a conscience, it's listening to that quote unquote voice inside.
Yeah.
That is guiding you towards what is right for you. Mm-hmm. And just as a side note, one of my guiding posts on that one is like, how do I know when my inner voice is telling me this is the right thing to do versus my ego telling me something? That whole, when is the right thing, the consciousness that's telling me this is right, Eric, and versus my ego going, oh yeah, this is right, go do this is great. The litmus test for me on that has always been, well, if I do this, is it going to be good for me and for others? as opposed to if I look at my ego side and I go, this isn't going to be good for me or my body or other people. Like, it's not just myself, it's others. It's going to impact others. With the yoga, it sounds like you have to, first of all, you have to explore and test. You have to go test and try, and then eventually you will get intuitively connected with what your body needs. And for yourself, you said you needed the active, and you like doing the active in the morning, restorative in the evening. Other people like these hold poses. Some other people might like the Bikram yoga. Some people like that. But nothing will keep us in everlasting ignorance is contempt prior to investigation. And that kind of brings us back to the beginning conversation, which is so many people don't do yoga because they have a stigma attached around it, or they think it's too woo-woo, or it's just for girls, or whatever it is. It keeps us in ignorance instead of going and exploring and seeing what works for us.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And, if you add in some meditation with the yoga, then that's where a lot of that inner wisdom comes from. So, again, it's sort of counterintuitive because you think, well, meditation, you're not doing anything. Your mind is empty. But it's often during meditation that ideas get sparked, or that you're setting your mind up to actually deal with something later on when you finish the meditation.
So how do you do that? Like what is an example of putting the meditation in with the yoga?
So I usually start in the morning with a meditation, and I find that a guided meditation helps me. Some people, after, if they're very experienced, they just sit and they flip right into that meditative state. Again, just like yoga, there are many different styles of meditation. There's, mantra meditation where you're repeating a phrase or a word over and over again. There's guided meditation. There's meditation to music. There's staring at candles, all sorts of things. But I subscribe to a service that provides guided meditation. So I usually just browse and see what's relevant to me that day. Do I need a meditation for positivity? Do I need it to relax my mind? Do I need it for inspiration? Whatever. So I find a guided meditation that suits where I'm at that day, and then I do the meditation, and then I do the yoga practice. So I find that actually in the Indian ancient definition of it, the body part of yoga was what prepared the person for meditation afterwards. But in my case, I start with a meditation and then move from meditation into yoga. And in some yoga classes, you actually have an integration of the two. There will be part of the class that will be meditation, and then there will be a part that's actually yoga practice. But again, it's what suits the individual and what you find works for you.
And then that leads us into another area of exploration for our fellow Vikings out there, is to find a meditation that works for us. What's the app that you use?
I use Insight Timer.
Insight Timer,
which is a subscription app. And also there's another app called Down Dog, which is a yoga app, but it has meditation to it as well. And I'm also a Peloton subscriber, which I mainly use for my Peloton bike. But they also offer yoga and meditation on Peloton. I just don't use them for that.
The irony is not lost on me here for where we have moved as an entire race of humans. 1970, I was born 1970, just to give you an idea. So I remember the 70s as a kid. And again, it would have been the woo-woo space, that yoga and meditation. You would never, and even growing up, no one talked about yoga and meditation. Whoever did yoga, they were like the hippies, right? And meditation, well, that was for the woo-woo crowd. But in the last, I'm going to say in the last 10-ish years, that's been my experience. It's all of a sudden become more mainstream. We're more talking about it. Even the high level corporate executives are like the world that you and I work in, like say call our day job work in. Now it's mindfulness and meditation and yoga is now being talked about more often. It's this holistic, how do we take care of the entire person instead of just, one aspect? And I think that's where we've probably moving from, is this unidimensional viewpoint of what a successful life is, to a integrated, multidimensional viewpoint of the human and their surroundings, like our environment.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that, you mentioned the word holistic, which maybe is hackneyed a little bit, overdone, but it really is, in my view, the essence of living the rich life, which is my whole philosophy in the book, the basis of the books that I've written. And we need to be much more holistic in this day and age. And, professionally, I was a financial advisor, and I always wanted to take a more holistic approach to being a financial advisor than just worrying about the numbers. I wanted my work to be about care for my client in totality, in success for them in their lives, not just financial success. And in a way, I feel that that's where yoga comes in, is to be part of that holistic approach to life.
And you and I resonated right away when we first met each other, again, at Strategic Coach, and seems to be the wellspring of all wonderful connections. And we were talking about our respective businesses, and yours is Next Chapter Lifestyles Advisors, and my Accountant Success Formula. Those two, you're for financial advisors, I'm in the accounting space, but our approach was start being holistic with your approach to this. And this is the same thing, is that I see yoga being that beautiful, holistic connection for the mind, the body, and the spirit. And I am definitely motivated now to go.
Right.
I want to start exploring more yoga, and I'm probably going to go back and try Bikram again, because that's just, I know that's who I am, and I'm probably going to need to go try that. But I'm very curious to go see all the different kinds. Now, can you just list off the different kinds that you can remember off the top of your head just for now, just so the listeners can kind of understand where to maybe start? Again, you said they should start at Hatha, right?
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And it also depends on how old you are, what stage of life you're at, how good physical condition you're in, what you're looking for the yoga to do for you. So it's very personal how you decide. But for me, I would say that Hatha is very approachable for anyone and a good place to start the exploration. From there, there's Ashtanga yoga, which is much more active and physical. There's Iyengar yoga, which was more or less the approach that I studied when I did my advanced teacher training. And that was started by BKS Iyengar in India, who was actually the teacher of my teacher when he grew up in India. And that's very much about alignment and precision in the body. So it's much more scientific in a sense. Then there's Yin yoga, which has become popular, and that's holding poses for long periods of time. Vinyasa yoga, which is a flowing style of yoga where you flow from one pose into another. It's active, but it's flowing. And then there's restorative yoga, which we've talked about, which is quite inactive. I don't think you burn a ton of calories in restorative yoga, the opposite, let's say, to hot yoga. But it has its benefit as well for the body, for the mind, for the spirit, for the breath. Some forms of yoga do incorporate breath work into them. Others pay no heed to breath at all. But I believe that if you say that spirit and breath are kind of synonymous, then how can you ignore your breath? And the breath is our best friend. It's the only thing that defines life versus death is the breath. So it's a fundamental element of living is breath. And breath can be, we all know that when you're stressed out and people say, take a deep breath, that deepening of the breath, elongating the breath already starts to click into the parasympathetic nervous system. And then there's breath in yoga, there's breath work for cooling the body, breath work for heating the body, breath work for cleansing the body, breath work for balancing the body. So breath can do amazing things. And that's all part of yoga from my perspective.
Yeah, the meditation gurus, shall I say, that I've followed and listened to, or let's take Eckhart Tolle, like the power of now. And
yes.
that he's really, I think Eckhart was also one of the pioneers of opening up spirituality to more mainstream. I remember reading his book when it first came out. It was very easy to digest because it was the power of now, which, once you realize and you start focusing on the present moment, everything, all your worries kind of disappear because you're no longer thinking about the past or worrying about the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or worrying or regretting the past or worrying about the future, you're all of a sudden in the present moment. But in his core teaching, which his wife or partner's spouse teaches, is showing people how to start the meditation. It's always starting with the breath. Or Eckhart comes back, just pay attention to your breathing, pay attention to the breath. It becomes the gateway, the key to opening up the door to becoming present. And
exactly. And that's being present is the hardest thing in the world for us to do. You would think, oh, just be present. It's so simple, but our minds are wired to think. And that's how our minds are designed, was to think. And probably historically in our DNA, they're to keep you out of trouble. To the tiger doesn't eat you, or to find food, you have to, be thinking and looking and so on. So as much as it sounds very simple, be in the present moment, it's actually very difficult for the mind to do that. So the meditation really is the act of returning over and over again from the busyness of the mind. Because the mind, as you say, always wants to go past, thinking of memories, or planning for the future, or getting emotionally involved in fear, anxiety, etc. So it takes a lot of training, I think, for us to really calm the mind in such a way that it becomes secondary to being truly present in the moment.
Coming to that shavasana, the dead corpse pose, do you find that when you're in that state at the end, that's when your mind settles and you become quiet?
Yes.
Like I would imagine that is a very present moment.
Yes.
Like a very grounding.
Yep. Exactly.
Like I can physically feel that just talking about it. I feel this grounding, this quieting of the mind, this peace that's in there, just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Eric Viking takes off and goes, let's go find something else to, blow up or break or make, that's absolutely beautiful. I love this, Susan. This has been, as always, I expect to have a great conversation, but this one has taken me down some roads where my thinking has changed dramatically specifically when it comes to yoga, and that how important yoga is to bring that union of the mind, the body, and the spirit together. I am so grateful that you're one of my first podcast guests. This has been awesome. I can't wait till this one airs. I'm going to probably listen to this one multiple times myself afterwards as well, because I find that for me, it helps to listen to it over and over again. And for our listeners out there, don't just listen to a podcast once. I find that listening to a podcast twice really gets me that deep transformation and that knowing and understanding. So, Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been awesome.
Oh, great. My true pleasure, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Viking Academy podcast. Make sure to leave us your honest feedback by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify, and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.